Hey, how's everybody doing tonight? Hey, it's starting to get dark, and I'm outside, sitting on my front porch. In fact, you can't see it, I can't pan over there, but there's a bunny rabbit right there, so that's kind of cool. Hey, hopefully it won't get too dark to do this. I hope I'll still be able to see and everything. But I want to share with you just a little bit. I want to ask you to do a little exercise with me. All right, we're going to study tonight on the hands of Jesus, and so let's start off like this. Just hold your hands up and look at them. All right, don't touch your face with them or anything like that. All right, listen to those warnings. Okay, but just look at your hands. Did you know you can tell a lot about a person by looking at their hands? So you look at somebody and they have a ring on their finger, and you're like, okay, that person is probably committed to somebody. There's probably somebody in their life that they have a relationship with. I have a scar on my finger here. That's from trying to open a can of baby formula at 70 miles per hour on the way from Memphis, where I was living, to Muskogee to visit my parents. Many years ago, probably about 14 years ago now, because my son that I was opening this formula for was just a 1-year-old at the time. And so, I'm trying to make a 6-hour trip in 5 hours. I'm trying to drive as fast as I can. I want to get there, right? And so I had all these bottles all to the perfect temperature. I'm driving in the car, and he's crying. I know he wants a bottle, but I don't want to stop because I'm a dude. I didn't want to stop, so I'm reaching back there and I'm trying to open it, and I'm pouring this formula, and I cut my finger. Right now, I'm delayed because I can't use that formula. I got to do something else. All right. So ended up having to go to Walmart at that time. All right. Now again, this was 14 years ago, so it's been a while, but it delayed me. Probably if I had just stopped to do it right the first time. But that scar's there, still there on my finger from that can of baby formula. It's been 14 years, but it's there, and it's there as a reminder. If a person's hand has paint on it, maybe you can say they either are a hobby painter, or maybe they're a professional painter. You can tell a lot of person just by looking at their hands. Maybe their hands are calloused from hard work, or maybe their fingernails are chipped from typing. You can tell a lot about a person just by looking at their hands. And so what I did was I went through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I spent a little time just looking at the hands of Jesus. How are his hands active? What is he doing in there? And I want you to think about the hands. First, Genesis talks about God creating the heavens and the earth. And he says, let there be light, and there was light. And in my opinion, I don't know, I just have this picture of God kind of as he's speaking saying, let there be light. And then boom, the lights come on. All right, there had never been light before, but there it is. I just always have this image of him moving his arms. Maybe he didn't do that. Scripture doesn't tell us, but I can't help but think perhaps that was the case. He's sending things into motion, and for some reason, when things get sent into motion, I like to use my hands. But you think about those hands, the hands that created and fashioned the universe and all it is, all the animals, all the trees, all the plants, all the life, the seas, the stars, everything that you can see, things that we can't even see, those hands that created entered this earth in the form of a little tiny baby. And I think about those small hands of Jesus gripping the finger of Mary because they were so small and that's all he could hold on to. Gripping the hand of Mary. The hands of Jesus as Jesus is just learning to walk, and he's holding on to Joseph and Mary's hands as he's a toddler. And he's just learning to walk. The hands of Jesus. I think of Jesus' hands being splintered from the carpenter shop of learning to build and be a craftsman along with his father, his earthly father, Joseph. His hands. So I want to look a little bit at the hands in the gospel. All right, that's all just kind of to set it up. But let's look for a moment at the hands of Jesus. Let's look at Mark. Let me find it here. I had it marked, and then I tried to to do this a while back, this video, and it didn't work. And so now I'm trying again. Mark chapter 1, verse 40. Jesus' hands are hands of compassion. There was a man with leprosy that came to him, and he begged him on his knees, and he said, "If you're willing, you can make me clean." And filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and he touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cured. Wow. Leprosy was terrible, man. Leprosy was something that you couldn't be around people. You talk about social distancing, all right? The lepers were socially distanced for a long time before we ever even really heard of it. Okay, so, I mean, I'm out here sitting on my porch. I don't even see anybody in my neighborhood going by. So I'm able to sit out here and do this because people are trying to keep their distance. But think about a leper. Socially distancing themselves. A leper. Lepers had to hold their hands in front of their face and say, "Unclean, unclean, unclean." As they entered the town, they had tattered clothes. Lepers often, they would lose feelings in the extremities, so they may be asleep and their hand be in the fire. They don't even know it. They're dirty and they're unclean, and you don't touch a leper. You just don't. You didn't touch a leper. And so, we get this picture of Jesus. And the man's coming to him and he says, "If you're willing." Now, Jesus could have just spoke. After all, didn't he say, "Let there be light," and there was light? But instead of just speaking it, because I believe he totally could have, he reached out and he touched the man. And he said, "I am willing." Oh, yeah, the man wanted to be cured, but he needed somebody to touch him. So I don't know how you're feeling, but I wonder about this man. Scripture doesn't tell us about him, other than that he was a leper, but I wonder, did he have a family? How long had it been since he'd been able to hug his wife, hold her hand, pat his son on the back, or give him a high five? I wonder. And so here's this man, this leper, longing for a touch. And Jesus gives that touch to that leper. Jesus' hands are also hands that heal. Not only did he reach out and he touched the leper with hands of compassion, his hands were hands that healed. You see him spitting in the mud and putting it on the eyes of the blind man in order to heal him. You see Jesus often reaching out his hands and touching and encouraging and saying, "Be healed, you're healed now." Jesus' hands are hands of compassion, but his hands are hands of comfort and healing. His hands are hands of healing. Hands of compassion in a leper, hands of healing. You can read all through the Gospels and you're going to see healing after healing after healing after healing. And sometimes in my life I need some healing because I got some sick stuff going on. There's some sickness in my life and I need God's healing touch. He heals the man born blind. He heals so many others. And his hands were hands of comfort. Matthew 19 paints this picture for us of Jesus walking along, and there's all these children that are kind of following him. People are bringing their kids to him and wanting him to touch the children. And his disciples are kind of like bodyguards, and like, "Hey, you don't have time for children," because kids were second-class citizens. They really were. I mean, we kind of honor children in our thing. We do everything we can to protect them, but they were really kind of second-class citizens. The children were. Matthew 9:13 through 15 says, "The little children were brought to Jesus for them to place hands on them and pray, but the disciples rebuked those who brought them. 'Don't bring those kids over here. We don't want those kids over here.' But Jesus said, 'Let those little children come to me. You do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these.' And he placed his hands on them. He placed his hands on them. He could have just said, 'Hey, y'all be nice to the kids,' but instead he went out of his way to touch the children. Jesus' hands are hands of comfort. Children maybe they were scared. Think back to when you were a kid. So Jesus has hands that heal. He has hands of compassion, and he has hands of comfort. But Jesus' hands are sometimes hands of rebuke and anger. We see this one in John chapter 2. It's told in other accounts, but I'm specifically choosing John's for a purpose here. John chapter 2. I believe it's verse 13. Let me find it here. When it was almost time, John 2:13, when it was almost time for the Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at the tables exchanging their money. And he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And then he said to those, "Get out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market?" Jesus, I picked this one because while this is in other Gospels, Jesus is sitting there. John says that Jesus is sitting there over in a corner and he's making a whip, and he's seeing all that's going on, and he's like, "You guys are taking advantage of the poor. You're making my house to be something that's not supposed to be." And Jesus is forming this whip with his hands. Do you understand the hands of Jesus? Those hands that were so comforting and compassionate are now hands that are making a whip to drive out the evil from the temple. Matthew says that in this same scene, he says that my house will be called a house of prayer, but you've turned it into a den of robbers. Sometimes God needs to come into my house and kick some junk out. He's got to overturn some tables of sin and selfishness in my life, and I need the hands of Jesus to do that. Hands of compassion, hands of anger, hands of comfort, hands of healing. But his hands were also hands of service. This is also in John's book, John chapter 13. It was just before the Passover feast, and Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and to go to his Father. And having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. And Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God, and that he was returning to God. So he got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing. See his hands in this? He gets up from the meal, takes off his outer clothing, wraps a towel around his waist, and grabs a basin of water and begins to wash the disciples' feet. He's using his hands to do this. Now there's a whole lot that you can go in there, because Peter says, "Don't wash me," and this and that, and that's an important part of this. But what I'm trying to get here is that Jesus' hands are hands of service. Jesus says the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom. So you've got Jesus' hands of compassion as he touches the leper. You've got Jesus' hands of healing as he heals so many people. You've got Jesus' hands of comfort as he says, "Come to me, little children." You've got Jesus' hands of anger or a rebuke as he drives people out of the temple. And you've got hands of service as he grabs the water and the towel and washes the disciples' feet. That was a job that's supposed to be reserved for the servants. It's supposed to be kind of the low guy. But Jesus, the Creator, grabs it with his own hands and begins to wash the disciples' stinky, smelly, nasty, funky feet. Nasty. But he does it as an act of service, because that's Jesus' nature. That's his heart. And Jesus' hands were hands of love and of sacrifice. Now I want you to think back at the very beginning when we talked about Jesus' hands of being so small and grasping the fingers of Mary, his mother, his earthly mother, and holding the hands maybe of Joseph in the carpenter shop. Think about all of those moments. And now see those hands folded in prayer as he prays, "Father, if there's any other way, take this cup from me. But not my will, but your will be done." See his hands folded in prayer, not just for his disciples who are there, because he says, "Let them be one," but for us. And he says, "Bless all those that will believe in me because of their message." He's praying for you and for me, folded in prayer on his knees in the garden, sweating drops of blood. His hands are folded in prayer for you and me. See his hands as he welcomes Judas's kiss of betrayal. Why a kiss, Judas? See his hands bound together as he's beaten and flogged. See his hands still bound together as the crowd cries out, "Crucify him and give us Barabbas instead." See his hands. Do you see them? See his hands as he carries that cross. And the weight of the cross begins to splinter and crack his hands open. See him as he falls and he uses his hands to try to pick himself up. See his hands stretched out on the cross with nails driven. See his hands as a sacrifice for you and me. See his hands. Do you see them? Do you see his hands? Can you just close your eyes and imagine and picture the hands of Jesus stretched out? You see those same nail-scarred hands going to Thomas and say, "Thomas, look at my hands. I'm real. I'm risen. It's really me." You've got hope in the hands of Jesus. Jesus is the sacrifice for you and for me. We can't earn our way into heaven. No matter how many good works we have, no matter how many check marks we do, all right? You can't say, "Well, I went to church every Sunday." Well, or today I went to online church. Check. All right? We can't do that. He had to pay the sacrifice, and you see his hands stretched out on the cross as a sacrifice for us, but those hands were risen from the dead as he ascended into heaven. So here's my question. I'm about to close this. I'm sorry if I'm going too long, but what part of your life needs to experience the hands of Jesus? Are you like the leper? Do you feel like an outsider? Do you feel like life has passed you by? Do you feel like you're not good enough, that you can't measure up? Do you feel left out? On the outside looking in? Do you feel alone? Do you feel unclean, like an outcast? And maybe you need the touch of compassion like Jesus gives the leper. Are there areas in your life where things are just sick and you need some healing? Not just a physical healing. I'm not talking about that here, but just an emotional, a spiritual healing. You've been broken down. You're broken. You feel broken inside. You feel sick inside. Your spirit's sick. Your soul, your heart is sick, and you need some healing. You need to experience the touch of healing from Jesus. Do you feel insignificant, like a second-class citizen? And maybe you need to experience the hands of comfort. As Jesus says, "Welcome." Don't you stop them from coming to me. Welcome. He reaches out his hands and he says, "Welcome." Or is there an area of your life where Jesus is trying to break in and flip over some tables and say, "Hey, my house is supposed to be a house of prayer," and you've turned it into something else? Does Jesus need to break in there and rip some things down and tear them apart and to say, "Let me in"? Is he forming a whip to drive out the evil from your life, to drive out the sin that's in your heart? Sometimes we need to experience those hands, although we don't like to talk about them. Or what about hands of service? Do you need to remember what he's done for you? He washed the feet of the others. And he said, "Now that I, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, you go and wash other people's feet." The hands of Jesus are hands of service. But don't forget that his hands were dirty and they were calloused, but they were so beautiful. The hands of Jesus. And I love the imagery that the Bible paints, because it says that we, the people that believe in him, the church, are now his hands and his feet to the world among us. We are the hands of Jesus. Are we serving others? How are we serving people? Right now, hey, I know folks are scared. We've got this COVID-19, this coronavirus going around, and people are afraid. What if we just served them? Now we're practicing the social distancing, okay, because we don't want to get other people sick. But how can you pray for somebody? Can you send them a text? Can you send them a call? Call them on the phone. Say, hey, I'm thinking of you. How can I pray for you? What can I do for you? Hey, I'm out of supplies. I have to go into town and get some supplies. Can I bring you something? Whatever it is. I hope and pray that we can learn to experience the hands of Jesus. Now listen, hey, it's dark out here. I don't even know if you can see me anymore. Like I said, I'm sitting outside, and it's almost 8 o'clock, and so it's getting dark. I just got a little bitty light shining, and so I don't know, it's making the camera all weird. You can see half my face, but not the other. I don't know. But here's the thing: the hands of Jesus are hands that will touch your life. So go through the Gospels. I encourage you to read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And as you're reading it, think about the hands. How are his hands moving? Do they move when they teach? Mine do. Every time I see Jesus teaching, I picture his hands moving. I picture him pointing to, or holding a mustard seed, or pointing to the fig tree. I picture these things because it helps me see Jesus in a whole new way. So I just ask you guys, please look at the hands of Jesus, look at them, and see how they want to touch your life. Because I know I need it, and probably you do too. Hey, I love you guys. I'm going to close it out, but please know that I'm praying for you. If you need somebody to pray something specifically for you, please don't hesitate to send me a message or a text or whatever, and just say, hey, pray for this, all right? So thank you for tuning in. Share this if you want to, if you feel led to. Love you guys, and I will catch you next time, all right? Bye.